Good afternoon. This is the regular meeting of the Tree Advisory Committee, and we'll call to order with the roll call.
System health, climate, equity, financial stability, and more. So the two big areas that we ask them to focus on, of the two big areas, we'll start with their recommendations for 15-minute neighborhoods. Cinda, it's you.
Didn't advance it. Oh, she's doing it. Right. So what is a 15-minute neighborhood? And the AIA final report offers this next. The 15-minute city is a concept that describes a residential community with a decentralized mixed-use development node that provides most of the residents' daily needs within a 15-minute walk from all the residents' homes. Next. Within a short walk or bike ride, people of all ages and abilities living in a 15-minute neighborhood have safe and convenient access to a variety of grocery and other retail stores, coffee shops, restaurants, schools, daycare facilities, parks, playing fields, public open space, community gardens, civic amenities, and affordable public transportation options. Next. This is, after all, is how people have lived for most of human history up until about 100 years ago, when the automobile arrived on the scene and came to dominate the public realm. Until that time, all previous generations had lived in villages, towns, and cities that allowed older people to move about safely on their own, that allowed children to play in the street, and fostered chance conversations between neighbors. The street was the public living room. Next. Whoops. As the urbanist and writer Jane Jacobs said, lowly, unpurposeful, and random as they appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life must grow. Although Jacobs wrote this in 1961, the concept remains as relevant today as ever. The AIA team started their analysis using a 15-minute walk circle. The radius in the middle of downtown, the radius of the 15-minute walk circle represents the distance that an average person can walk in 15 minutes, about 3/4 of a mile, and this slide shows the walk circle centered on the downtown. Next. Then, after looking at a range of social and environmental data, the AIA team overlaid 15-minute walk circles over a map of the whole city. This map shows 9 overlapping walk circles, each centered on a mixed-use development node. As the AIA team said in their final report, these maps and drawings presented within this section were created during our 4-day visit and are intended to be conceptual and illustrative rather than prescriptive. The intention was not to create detailed schematics, but rather to spark inspiration and a new way of thinking about these areas. Our local team has been sparked by the inspiration of the report and developed a few more specific recommendations that are informed by our deeper understanding of Petaluma. Next. We enthusiastically support the development of 15-minute walkable mixed-use neighborhoods and believe that the location of these mixed-use neighborhood nodes merits more careful study and community input. Next. Cities throughout history have grown and changed organically because our present zoning codes tend to discourage mixed-use development. They inhibit organic growth and change. Next. We believe it's important to encourage the spontaneous development of mixed-use neighborhoods through revisions to our zoning code that would permit limited commercial uses on parcels currently zoned exclusively residential, with uses and hours as appropriate. Next. This would reintroduce the much-needed element of liveliness, neighborliness, and community into our residential neighborhoods. And we'll next talk about transportation, and I'll give you back, Pete, back to you.
Oh, you're there. The SDAT team titled this section Reimagining Mobility. At the August 5th community meeting, they heard participants identify 5 key challenges that our present roadway system presents here in Petaluma. Next. They heard the community voice these concerns: fragmented bikeway network, limited crosstown connectivity, motorists speeding through neighborhoods, narrow sidewalks, and unreliable transit service. So none of these really are revelations to us, but now we have an outside consultant affirming what we have been saying, what we already know, and that has some value. The AIA team presented a big, bold design solution that addresses these challenges while also integrating trees and other vegetation into our streetscapes, improving stormwater management, reducing urban heat island effect, furthering our Vision Zero goal of 0 fatalities and serious collisions by 2030, fostering 15-minute neighborhoods, and helping move us toward our goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. Next, please.
Not next, no. I had you go ahead.
This is where I want to be. The first set of recommended actions in the final report under the section of Reimagining Mobility is grouped under the heading Remove Barriers. And first among them, notably, is Fix Washington Street. The report reads, quote, "The city and its partners must fix Washington Street to meet its goals related to climate resiliency, carbon neutrality, vehicle miles traveled, connectivity, and safety." The report illustrates the big, bold fix as a green ribbon of connected corridors, a complete and integrated network that starts by transforming Washington Street and then our other 4-lane arterials, such as Eli Boulevard, McDowell Boulevard, and others, transforming them into what they call green corridors. In this illustration, a typical 100-foot wide roadway right-of-way is transformed into 33 feet for vehicles with wide planting areas and multi-use pathways on both sides. Next slide, please. Imagine Washington Street between, say, Petaluma Boulevard and McDowell Boulevard transformed into this kind of a streetscape. It is an idea that in our current thinking, this is just crazy talk. But these are the kind of big, bold ideas that we feel are needed. Next slide. The report also calls for transforming gray corridors into healthy, walkable, bikeable, resource-rich, diverse corridors. The transformed arterials, like Eli Boulevard and McDowell, would then be connected to our existing network of creekside multi-use trails to create a complete and integrated mobility network linking all of our schools, parks, playgrounds, playing fields, and commercial districts. And I'll just note that in this illustration that's in their final report, the red line is 101, and it's interesting that they didn't really know how to address 101. The fairgrounds is also in there, and they didn't really know how to address the fairgrounds. So they left a few important linkages unspecified. But to me, this as a bold idea, as a template, is very exciting. Next slide. Such a system is designed with consideration of the needs not just of bicycle riders and pedestrians, but also of drivers of all types of vehicles and users of all types of mobility devices, both self-powered and powered by electricity. Among the other recommendations in the final report, 3 others stand out. Next slide. First, the AIA team identified our street design standards as being out of step with our intentions and out of step with current best practices. Our standards were last updated in 1996. The report reads, quote, "Best practices for street design in the United States have evolved in profound ways since then, especially in the arenas of prioritizing safety for active transportation and incorporating landscaping and green infrastructure." Next slide. Second, the report recommends improving transit reliability and frequency in order to encourage all residents and visitors to use transit rather than drive. And third, next slide, that we create a neighborhood traffic calming program. From the report, quote, "In addition to more traditional traffic calming treatments such as curb extensions and speed humps, which we are now doing in the city should explore or continue to explore mini traffic circles, raised crosswalks, and one-lane pinch points." This illustration shows one very simple and clever solution. This is just paint on pavement. Next slide. Send back to you.
So in summary, our vision for a prosperous, resilient, regenerative city requires policy implementation that will facilitate necessary physical changes. Those include reconfiguring streets so that bikes and pedestrians can traverse safely, rewilding and green our streets, neighborhoods, and parks, reduce average vehicle speeds, build some slack into our zoning ordinance in residential zones, create neighborhood cores in convenient locations, providing needed green spaces, services, and a sense of place. De-emphasize car parking through reduced parking and parking management, and reimagining the transit system to align with the above changes. Next. The high-level recommendations we wish to reinforce and advance are these. 1, to integrate the big, bold ideas contained in the SSTAT final report into all of our guiding documents, our general plan, implementing zoning ordinance, smart code, climate action and adaptation plan, active transportation plan, and street design standards. 2, to actively work toward and remove barriers to creating mixed-use 15-minute neighborhood nodes in convenient locations around town. 3, to fully commit to the goal of our 2008 Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan, which is to build, quote, "a safe, comprehensive, and integrated bicycle and pedestrian system throughout Petaluma that encourages bicycling and walking and is accessible to all." Next. Our future, for what all that it might or might not be, is a shared future. We're all in this together, and we need to work together as a community to realize our vision. Next. And thank you for the opportunity to bring these big ideas into public discourse, and thanks to the City of Petaluma, to our strategic partners, and to all of the hardworking community members who helped to bring the SSTAT to reality. Next. Your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Darren.
Well, thank you guys for the presentation. I was there in August. I think there was a great energy around just the public discussions. I thought there were a lot of new voices included. And I think the output really is kind of stunning. You know, we've been talking some in this group about that idea of the view from the street. When you think about a city's overall design and kind of the energy of a city, it's like the view you get from different streets and arterials plays a huge role in that. And I think, you know, the vision here is beautiful, and I would be proud to have that as our view from the street. One of the things I'm thinking of, and Cindy, you may be able, this is kind of a bigger discussion point. When we think about street trees, there's kind of this gray area with street tree management and responsibility in Petaluma when we think about, really packing, we just saw it with McDowell, packing streets full of trees, the space, but also private property ownership issues. And this is kind of, again, we're talking about big ideas. Do you ever see Public Works taking over management of street trees as kind of like public infrastructure? I would see that as a big piece of making a design like this work. Is that something that would ever be like discussed or in the cards?
I can't speak for Public Works. I think the one thing I can say is that in the city code as it sits now, it's the responsibility of the property owner. So if the city owns the property that has the road tree, then we would take care of it. So whether it's a city facility, that would fall to me. If it's a city park, it would fall to me. If it's, I think, a street median or something that's abutting something else, then Public Works would. If it's a property like water pump station or something else that's abutting it, I won't say that it's not impossible, but currently the way the code sits, the code would have to have change, right, to facilitate that.
Because there's a lot packed in this, but of course what stands out to me is like the vision of that many trees, that much vegetation, both, around streets, but also around rivers, which I think may not have these exact same issues. But just something to think about in the analysis. That is something we've seen a couple times with street designs, is that issue of, look, we want to pack this full of trees, but we're going to have to negotiate with each and every property owner, whether that's figuring out easements or incentives to just have them do it and maintain it on their own. Even if, I believe what I've heard is that even if the city is going to, or even if the city plants the tree, they may have to have like an easement on the property owner's water line to then use that to irrigate the tree. So that's just something to think about in implementing this. That's a big piece. And then has this already gone to GPAC? Because thinking about that 15-minute nodes and everything, has this gone to?
Tomorrow night.
All right, perfect. That is the perfect place.
Your wish is our command.
For these ideas. Already ahead of me, reading my mind. And then, when we saw this presented at council, there was the issue of the economic analysis. And I remember the SDAT crew couldn't bring their big economic guy. Have they put, or is there anything on that front with economic viability of some of these nodes? You showed my neighborhood there on Western with Fair West and some of those other shops that are really buoyed by being in the tri-school area. So you get a lot of traffic and folks moving through. But is there, as far as you know, you may not, has there been any more on that front?
As I read the final report, the economic analysis is very weak.
Okay.
And we can all easily imagine in our current climate, our current economic climate, big challenges, big headwinds to putting in small neighborhood grocery stores and other small retail. So there are questions. But I wouldn't want to give up on the idea just saying that, well, everybody's going to shop at Amazon, so it's just not going to work. We got a lot of challenges, but we need to be thinking in these directions.
I totally agree. And so that's good to flesh that out. And I've also thought, if we get that reliable, more frequent transit, and that's at some nexus point, maybe that's the kind of fills the gap for now as, hey, this makes it these other places more accessible until we know that there's something there to sustain an actual retail in that location or something to that effect.
Right. It's it's a very much a chicken and egg thing, like bike infrastructure. Why would we want to build more bike infrastructure if we don't see people riding bicycles? Well, on the other hand, you build it and they will come. That's been proven all over the place.
And we plant the trees, and that makes mode shift easier because that big sidewalk will get used if it's shaded in the summertime. So I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
Sure, I can comment. First of all, thank you. Thank you. Your citizens, I am aware of how hard you've worked on this, how many hours over how many years without pay. Thank you. This is excellent work. I get that it's to get us to think, and not all of the pieces are perfect. And I think that's completely valuable, and it's very appreciated. Thank you. I've had just a couple of questions. Number one, just before I forget, Heat Island. I see people walking with jackets over their head, holding them up like umbrellas, as well as people with umbrellas. It's just too hot out there, and that's like the big catch-22 or chicken egg thing, right? It's Heat Island, and that's why we're here on the tree committee, one of the reasons. Just a comment, but I'm aware of on East Washington, it's Highway 1 effectively, or connector out to Bodega and the coast. It gets an average, according to the 2020 traffic report conducted by the city, which I have if you need it because I had to do a PRA to get it. East Washington has an average of 20,000 cars per day. My understanding is one lane can handle about 2,000 an hour, but that's average. There's no clue in that analysis of what's the high, what's the low, what's the variability around that average. So, when I think about East Washington and all that it needs to be, because it needs a lot, I'm thinking about the traffic analysis. So I'm curious about that. I don't need your comment about that, but I just wanted to share that I'm curious about that. Another comment, ecosystem health. This guy here talks about that a lot. I'd love it if at some point, and I will be attending, this is my second time seeing your presentation. Thank you. I'd love to give a little indication to like city council and planning commission. What the heck is soil health? Because we're laying down astroturf, which creates dead zones underneath it. So we need to ramp up the education, the understanding about that. Thank you. Okay, so now my questions would be basically one question. The 5 key challenges reinforced by the SStat experts, the AIA. What are your plans for action assurance? How are we going to hold the city accountable for getting out of the box, rethinking their thinking, redoing their culture? Just this past year, the city got $50 million extra dollars, which I think was something like a 50% increase over the budget the year before. Free money. What are the levers that you're thinking of pulling to try to get the city to stop saying we don't have enough money for parks? We don't have any more money for park staff. It's an issue with culture and thinking. And so I'm interested for all of those five key things, and you can just hit on a couple. But I really want to reinforce bridging the gap between amazing work, lovely, smart vision, and getting change over on this side. Thank you.
Could I respond briefly to that? In the short time that I have been a community activist, that I've taken a more active role in city affairs, I end up with a lot of respect, huge respect for city staff. They are, for the most part, very capable, hardworking, overburdened, and I think it's fair to say, without denigrating anybody, that their job is to maintain. And in order to get to our 2030 goals of Vision Zero and carbon neutrality, we need to do much more than just maintain. And I think, well, where do those big ideas come from? Not from city council, not from city staff. They necessarily have to come from us, the community. So I sense that we who are not sitting on committees, who have an interest in the direction, the future of our city, that we have a really important role to play in politely, respectfully, and continually pushing our city toward greater aspirations. So that's a partial answer to how do we get there. Part of the answer is that we, the community, just need to keep showing up and need to keep pushing.
I'll just add, I feel like that's a very important question, and I think there's many of us who are trying to find out how to have partnerships. You know, how can the city staff who wants to get things done and the community who has ideas, how can we work together to break down some of the silos and actually put our energies and resources in ways that are productive as opposed to, spinning our wheels. So I think it's a really important point.
Thank you. So this is the final deliverable, isn't it, for AIA, for the SSTAT?
Yes. There may be a future deliverable that we haven't yet imagined.
Okay. Thank you for that. I look forward to seeing the manifestations of what you will imagine to get some real concrete ideation and cooperation going on between city, community, and supporting that. Thank you.
Your question? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thank you both. This is wonderful. Loved seeing this. Those renderings of the streetscapes with those beautiful trees and more mobile pathways just are, just something we can aspire to here and hopefully move towards that with GPAC and a lot of community involvement. And so I don't have a lot more to add. I thought Darren's point was worth reemphasizing, just that our current model right now with everybody responsible for their tree, or owners responsible for their own planting strip, makes it a little bit challenging to kind of maybe revamp East Washington, for example, with a beautiful streetscape. Now, that said, I'm sure there's ways to do it. It's just that's the same sort of challenge that came to mind. Now, that said, we're going through the revamp of the tree ordinance. It's on City Council's radar as a major priority. So hopefully we'll address that issue as well, and others like repopulating our vacant planting strips. I just had to get that in. Anything else? I think that I'll yield the floor at this point.
Thank you all. I thank you very much. I appreciate you coming out and sharing this with us. My main comment is yes, please. And it's gorgeous. Yeah, it's a gorgeous presentation, and certainly the schematics and the conceptuals for the expanded streetscape, especially that Washington Boulevard one, was really a lovely thing to see. And I think I keep coming back to the 96 street standards, and sort of that seems sort of low-hanging fruit. Like, how do we change that? And that's something that we can change, as a city policy, as a city standards. It's not really probably going to cost much money, and it also isn't going to be any sort of increased work on our city staff. And I also agree with everybody else. I think our city staff's doing a great job, and they're overworked. And I also liked what you said, Pete, about the community education and ideas. Like, that's where these things are going to happen. It's people like us out on the streets every day being held hostage to automobiles and trying to make a walk street where there should be a walk street, and having a car come down and then having to argue with the car because they're parked on the sidewalk trying to go across a red light. It's maddening. The other thing I didn't see in here, but it's certainly with me and with the street trees, is the permeable paving. I know a lot of cities are adopting that, especially in the parking strips or in the more walkable strips. It just increases airflow and hydration for the street trees. And then again, the maintenance thing is a big one for me. It's I don't see how we can hold residents or business owners responsible for taking care of these trees. As they get to a certain point, it's very expensive. And a lot of people just don't have $3,000 to spend to trim a tree, because that's what it costs. But also, the definition, like Darren said about the median strips, and sort of, I noticed, I was talking to Cindy the other day and Taryn this morning, today about the median in front of Target where East Washington goes, and it's full of weeds, which is fine with me. I think that's fine. But I noticed the irrigation is an inch away from the trunk of an oak tree, which means that oak tree is just going to rot and fall over. So who's going to maintain? Who's responsible for changing that? And I don't know that that's clear for something like that that's been put in by a developer. Again, this is a great presentation. I would like to see or maybe hear more about what a priority might be. It's a great schematic. It's a great concept, but how do you get from A to B? So what's the main priority there? And that was it. I like the de-emphasized parking, transit, bikes. I like the shared future idea. It's not just people in automobiles that get to decide how we live in a city. And I also have been actually walking down, I live downtown and I own a couple of businesses downtown, and I realize that the streets are too narrow. If you've got two people walking down the street in downtown Petaluma, you can't get by them.
Sidewalks.
The sidewalks, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. And I also like the way that they bring in this whole idea of the systems thinking for cities. I think that's a good conversation. And that's it. Thank you.
While I'm here, could I just make another comment?
Yes, please.
Directly related to this discussion. I've become aware that in public works worldview, they don't do trees and they don't handle stormwater in the current, according to current best practices. If you look at any Caltrans project, any new shopping center, any parking lot, the parking lot, instead of draining to catch basins and area drains and then into pipes and out to the river, they're designed to retain the stormwater on site. But our streets are not the stormwater design of our streets is still the old school of get it off to the river as quickly as possible. So Public Works needs to think about planting areas and trees, and also needs to think about its stormwater management on streets as a means of irrigating the planting areas, so that we don't have to bring in purple pipe water and irrigate. So they kind of go hand in hand, and it's one big thing that needs to change.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Just when it comes to strategy, I would definitely, from seeing all of this and kind of, I think, I might be focused on the trees, but it seems like that arterial new infrastructure, if you will, is a great place to start. And I think showing up in discussions with Public Works, and if you have anything tangible, like any example, best practices on street design, on stormwater management, I think as citizens or as a citizen group, I found meeting with Public Works, and I'm forgetting now the gentleman's name who's now kind of responsible for outreach there, who's now working with Dan and Christopher Bolt and the team. When I brought up concerns about the AMI meters, he reached out to me really quickly. Lucas, that might be it. That sounds right. And I found reaching out to them, they're very receptive. They want to meet, they want to interface. So it's great coming to committees, commissions, and boards. But I think that communication, and you're probably like, we already have a meeting with them, but that communication directly with Public Works, I think could yield a lot of fruit to start getting those ideas in, especially if you have some examples.
Yeah.
And then, for this conversation, we obviously are going to try to have this conversation clearly about trees and the purview of the city and how we manage it, like public infrastructure, what that looks like. But I think you guys with clear design concepts, doing so much work already, there could be a lot of great ground to cover there. And especially if that conversation comes and then you follow up when there are repavings, because we have a huge repaving kind of schedule laid out now, showing up to those conversations, and we'll certainly be promoting trees. And now we can say, look, have you guys seen the SDAT? We can kind of start pushing these ideas.
Reference
into
the
it.
street design standards, which probably don't have anything to say about trees.
Right. So I think keeping those conversations going for your guys' end, our end, helps kind of move this forward. So
Hit them from both sides.
that's right. As a team, on the same team.
just those, on the street standards, I think there was that one slide that really addressed like where we're at now versus the, where the 90s, like our current streets versus what the best practices could look like. Would that be kind of?
The slide only showed one page from our current street design standards. It did not. We haven't yet done the research
Okay.
to come up with a set of standards that we might recommend.
Okay, all right.
That might be happening now at Public Works. So we need to keep talking.
Okay.
Thank you for
Thank you.
being willing to keep talking, conversations with Public Works to get them increasing the understanding of creating a system of bioswales and stormwater capture to then in turn support trees will, I think, help transform the thinking that has been going on. Thank you for your willingness.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You're welcome to join us for the rest of the meeting, or
Find out why my router is down.
okay. Okay. Thank you both very much. And with that, we'll move on to our approval of minutes. And do we have an approval of minutes for the meeting of April 19th, 2023?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Yeah, majority has it. And public hearings, matters for consideration, a resolution to create an ad hoc committee for policy outreach. I wonder if we want to table that till next month, since we have two people, and we also have new people coming on in June. Are they coming on in June? July.
July 1.
I'd like to move ahead with maybe creating an option to allow them to vote if we're doing something with voting, especially since we know that tree ordinance is underway and there are other pieces to that that are relate to that fall into our interest area and charter. So I'd prefer to move forward today. Thank you.
Chair Formby, if I may just say, there are two people missing. You have one, so there's total members of 7 generally. And maybe a recommendation to the committee members here today to have the discussion of what you would like the policy ad hoc to be, but maybe wait to vote on a resolution on the membership, because really, if you were to assign either Mary Kate or Roger, they're not here, so they don't have a chance to say if they'd like to be on the ad hoc or not.
Well, and in case of, I think, aren't they both rolling off the committee?
And they will vote both, well, unless they are reappointed by their commissions, right? Either by planning or by rec commission.
Yeah,
So-
that was my only concern, was just that people staffing the committee and being present to do that. But I would happy to have a conversation about it.
Excuse me, Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'd be happy to have a conversation about it. But I do think we should wait to staff it until we have a full committee.
I agree. I think we shouldn't select members with only 4 people here. And in that vein, I know we're going to do an update on the recently created communication and outreach ad hoc. So I am thinking about what the scope of a policy ad hoc would be, because we do have the tree ordinance coming up. And just thinking about, would we not limit communication, but would we try to focus this communication with certain departments or in very certain aspects? Because when we have these communication and outreach meetings, they get pretty far ranging and they do touch on like some policy ideas. So I'm wondering, with guidance from staff or from the committee members here, when we create this to specify that scope, would it just be talking about ordinances and land use? Would we include any discussions with Public Works? What do you guys think about that? Or would it be like just communications with planning, or maybe the community development umbrella, right? Planning, building, and housing. Will we include Public Works? When I was thinking about this, now that we've had a couple communication outreach ad hoc meetings, to not be duplicative in our efforts, how we can kind of focus those.
Well, thank you. It occurs to me that this came up because of the tree ordinance specifically, but now after this presentation, we also have these street standards, which I know we're all interested in. So I guess that's a good question. How does this differ from the progress or the ad hoc committee, the outreach ad hoc committee? And I'd like to hear more about that.
And the other thing I'm thinking is it would give more voices and members of the tree committee to have these discussions with staff, which I think are productive. But just thinking about maybe scoping each to make sure that, we're not overlapping, which I know was referenced at kind of the inception. And now that we've run up against that, I am thinking about, do we just focus on ordinance or policy issues, specifically zoning issues, maybe specifically city standards, something like that, that would almost be check-ins with this policy committee to have some kind of meeting with planning or community development staff to say, hey, have there been any updates? Is there anything? Something like that, maybe?
It occurs to me that perhaps this policy outreach could be specifically for the tree ordinance, since that's our most pressing issue right now. And I believe, Cindy, you said we could sort of extend this ad hoc later if it wanted to.
Right, so you want to have a specific reason and a time frame, but if you get to the end of your time frame or either one, the committee's always open to say, we haven't finished the work yet. It's when there's no specific time frame or purpose, then it becomes a standing committee, which means then you have to be in accordance with the Brown Act and all those things. Whereas ad hocs are generally meant to be like for a specific task and period of time. In my memory, and Committee Member Rakusin, I think when you brought this up and you said when you were talking this through and we're forming the other ad hoc, is that you want to do some work strictly with policy, right? Whereas I feel like the outreach and ad hoc, the way that's set up is to be more broad and to do reach out and advocacy for trees, right? So it's not just meant to meet with city staff, but it could be doing things that are outside of the city staff to do outreach. So I consider that ad hoc to be much more broader and into the community. I think that Chair Formby, I think you're hitting it on the head. I think this conversation stemmed around the tree preservation ordinance update. And I think based on the presentation you saw here, maybe there's something else you may want to add to it. It also doesn't mean that at any point you can't bring it back forward and say, hey, we think we need to change the scope of what the ad hoc is doing, right? The committee's within their purview to re-agendize it and change the scope a little bit. My recommendation as staff would be to pick what you think you can put your energy towards, because there's a lot of policies and I don't want to overwhelm anybody on the committee because it's a lot of work. So what I would say with this, my recommendation is say, where is your efforts best placed for you to do that outreach and work and get that information to share back with the rest of the committee members?
I would think that would be the tree ordinance, because that's our most pressing thing. And I think even these design standards are going to come under that purveyance of this tree ordinance. So I would move that we focus this just on this pressing issue of the tree ordinance.
I agree with this thinking, only because the ad hoc for community outreach has had a few engagements thus far, and we've got a lot. It's broad. And when you think about the tree ordinance, it is very technical, very policy, very specific. And then I think 3 people in community outreach, and we're already doing, we got good ideas. We got a lot of activity going on. How the heck could we squeeze the ordinance into that is my thinking. And then at this time, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm still thinking the ordinance is the key piece to focus on.
Yeah, I agree, and thank you guys for helping giving me my thoughts here. But no, I think focusing on the ordinance is a great idea, and I think focusing on public works and those kind of standards, and as I'm thinking about this, compared to what we do with outreach currently, this policy committee could come with more of a researched perspective, right? Like here are some examples that we've seen in other cities that were, I know cities like Santa Monica have been referenced for their policy, and that group could be reaching out if they have contacts, and I'm looking at our absent seat there for Roger, if they have contacts at other cities that have done these things, to bring those materials and sit down in a very substantive, focused conversations with staff on these issues. So yeah, I think there is definitely a space for that and enough difference to make it worth it. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any feelings about it? No? So do we have a motion that, are we asking for a motion on this or?
No, I think the decision and the discussion was to wait until there's more members here to
Okay.
actually form. But we'll look back at the notes. I think it's pretty clear that this would be a ad hoc policy specifically looking at the tree ordinance,
So I'm fine with that.
or tree preservation ordinance
you.
update.
Thank you. And then one more, and then we'll.
Thank
move
you. I have a
on.
little question. What if, well, they're both park and then planning, so they're liaisons, right? Those are the two rolling off, except for Bill, who can reapply, right?
There's no term limit, so yes.
So there's only a minimal chance that next month we'll be down to 4 again. And that doesn't seem like it would stop things in a month anyway.
All right, then that's great. Thank you all. I'll move along to an
Chair
update for.
Formby,
Oh,
you do
yes.
have to open to general
Oh,
public
for-
comment.
Is there a general public comment? Thank you. Then move it on to Communication and Outreach Ad Hoc Committee Progress Update.
Taryn, are you okay with giving me
I'll
an
let you guys
update
fight it out.
or giving if I give him an update and you fill in the blanks, or what do you want to do?
I can start.
Okay.
Thank you. We've had occasion to meet a couple times and to catch up on ideas by doing some research about everything related to trees. We did meet with a couple of people from the community, just on an exploratory basis, kind of situation assessment, opportunities. And so we are off to a pretty good start, I would say. A lot of ideas expressed, some ideas, at least in my head, not yet expressed, but it does feel like there's a lot of good energy there and a lot of good opportunity for value provided.
Yeah, I'd say the committee got off to a great start. We've already had 2 meetings, right, with Brian O., our Director of Community Development, and with John Shribs, a current council member, and of course, prestigious ex-chair of the tree committee. And yeah, we talked about some great ideas. There's a lot, these discussions about how do we manage trees in our public spaces? How do we focus on urban forestry as an element of urban design? I think was a big conversation. I have to say, from someone who's seen Brian O. at a lot of meetings, planning, he's at everything. Getting a chance to sit with him and speak with him, I found him really to be intelligent, competent, capable, and I think he's really been, for the past year, absorbing a lot of how the city works, what goes on here, and I think has some great ideas and was really excited about Tree Committee and the mission to promote more trees and tree-laden streets and all of that. I think he's very on board with. And then obviously we know where John Shribs stands in all of those same veins. One of the issues, I think we focused on 2 core issues, which again we heard tonight. That is who manages the trees, especially street trees, and then how do we get started with kind of this urban master plan? And I know I've said it a million times that the ordinance is one piece of successful urban forestry policy, and the tree ordinance really focuses on tree preservation, mitigation during development projects. If you remove a tree, how do you replace it? So its scope is pretty well defined, and some things that we want to see policy-wise won't neatly fit under that umbrella. So it was thinking, okay, what is the foundation we need to develop that larger plan? And one thing that did come up, I think in both contexts, was the existing urban forestry grant. And I don't want to fall too much into, we can agendize maybe a discussion point, but I do want to say that in talking about that idea, I know right now we have a scope of tree inventory on parks and kind of city-owned spaces. And I haven't read the original grant, but the idea was presented, okay, well, if we have this money already set aside and we don't, again, I'm not sure the exact rules of usage and everything that was stipulated, but if we want a foundational plan of what our vision of urban forestry should be in the city, a tree plan, what problems are we trying to address? Where are we and what problems are we trying to address? Public land is a relatively small part of that, we think. Again, if you had a baseline, we know how much canopy coverage is already on public land, how much canopy coverage is on private land. And I quickly get into the zone of thinking there are people that know much more about setting up these plans than I do. So is it possible to use this grant to bring in someone, and I guess Ben Anderson had been attempted to be kind of tapped in the past, but he's really busy. He's helping a million cities and things. So, but someone of that same vein who's done this before, has worked with cities, has seen what a successful urban forestry plan is, working with all the parts of public works and all the different departments and responsibilities. Could we use that grant money to secure that kind of expertise to help us set a foundation of where should we be going based on their expertise? And then also, again, in the vein of kind of stretching this money, focus on some kind of aerial mapping, really solid aerial mapping. And I believe I've seen in general plan meetings from Ramey and Associates maps of tree coverage. Now they're probably Commissioner or Committee Member McCarrollane was explaining to me how aerials for trees can be tough because it depends on the angle, and if you have, all of that can kind of throw off what the tree cover is. But could we get some kind of satellite aerial mapping to establish what our canopy coverage is? And with those two pieces, I don't know exactly how much that would be, right? 220 or 250,000 isn't a lot for these kind of projects. Could those two pieces be brought in to help us set that foundation that helps us decide what is next? Maybe it is that public land is the biggest concern, or city-owned land. Maybe it is that we're really seeing problems in private property. Maybe there's certain areas of the city that stand out as, whoa, this area needs the attention first. And, those discussions happen with both people we talk to. Obviously, right now, the grant is being managed under Cindy as one of your million responsibilities. So I wondered kind of what your thoughts are around that. And you may have discussed this to death already, but we're having these ideas floating around. It's like, how can we use this money most efficiently with the best first steps? And it sounds like some of them have been started with Ben Anderson, but as a segue here, what do you think about using that grant in that kind of way? Have these discussions already happened and we ended up where we are for a reason? I'm just really curious, because with both Brian O and with Shribs, this was a talking point, like, man, this could set the stage from some of these bigger vision ideas potentially.
So I can answer a lot of questions, and I would invite the ad hoc to ask to meet with me so we can go through the grant. I'm happy to do that. And it kind of explain all that. I think for Howard and Bill, they've probably heard some of this before because the grant application just went through so long ago. But one of the deliverables of the UFM, the CAL FIRE grant, is a 30 to 40 year urban forestry plan. Now, the intent of it was that, when we went in, when we had to put the grant in because there had to be some matching, we have no oversight of private property. So for us to put in for grant monies to have oversight of private property was just not possible with this grant monies. So the intent on my side, I'll tell you, when I was working with Relief, we're trying to figure out how does this partnership work, because they've got a community aspect piece and a planning piece, is that we need somewhere to start, right? We need to start somewhere. So starting, like, the easiest way is to start with city-owned spaces, which is parks and facilities, and I happen to be the person who has oversight of maintenance for those spaces. So it just made a lot of synergy. It doesn't mean that there's things like you can use LiDAR, and Davy Tree uses they have a software that they use and a technology that they use to kind of look at satellite maps to kind of do some mapping. And the intent was always to get the first part which is the city-owned spaces, to say, okay, like, look, this is great. It helps us with our plan for city-owned facilities. Now we need the full city scope. We always knew that this wouldn't be the be-all, end-all, right? It wasn't the grand master plan. It was to be able to provide some deliverables that people could actually see to affect changes with our trees. Because I'll be honest with you, we haven't had that. We have no data, right? With the exception of Cindy walked through this park and she saw a sycamore that, that Howard loves so much that is planted in this park. And, there's a coast live oak that I love over here, or, and that is not what we need in order to have a bigger plan. But yeah, I'm happy to meet and talk with you guys and show you the grant application and, maybe bring Relief in as well, because they've just been such big partners in that kind of process. And I'll give you an update on where I'm at. There's some exciting movement on that end. And, Ben is involved at this point on different levels. So I'm happy to fill you guys all in on that, though.
I'll just add, one thing that came out of our meeting is, and I have a copy of the grant application, so we did look through that and did discuss that, and we see that it includes, tree inventory, an update to the ordinance, which Heather said she's working on. And it did include a comprehensive urban forest management plan, as well as 4 other things are the key deliverables. And I guess I'd be interested also, please, in seeing the RFP that went out that correspond to these key deliverables. And then a question, am I recalling correctly that maybe with the GPAC work that Ramey and Associates did a canopy coverage assessment? Somebody did, and then came out with the bottom line of Petaluma is the equivalent of Vallejo, right? And that's what everyone remembers. Was that, to some extent, was it done already?
So that Ramey and Associates did some work that I know of, and I saw the same, I think, presentation, Taryn, as you did, that, kind of looked at our canopy on, I think, at a high level using satellite info, just kind of looking to see what was there, and the comparable was to Vallejo. But the actual tree inventory, so the difference with the work that they did, I think they just looked at the, and I'll have to ask them, so don't quote me, but I think they just looked at satellite and kind of saw what the measurements would be and what your percentage of canopy cover was. Whereas the tree inventory is an actual inventory of the tree, where it's at, putting it in our GIS or a software, where its health level is at, species, recommendations, for pruning or maintenance. So it's a much more comprehensive tool as opposed to what Ramey had done. So they just gave us the percentage of cover that we have.
Thank you. What I have to wonder off the top of my head right now, because I'm such a fiscally responsible person in my personal life as well as business life, is I see a deliverable is tree canopy mapping and analysis, but then also new tree inventory. And I believe tree inventories cost a couple $100K when you're going around identifying tree to tree and all the specifications of it. But I've seen that we found in our research that the tree canopy assessment might be done for as little as $20,000 or less. So do we have an indication of whether we're, at this time, whether we're planning to spend all of this money on something like an inventory, which to me seems like a Rolls Royce, and we're not appropriate in the market for a Rolls Royce in this town?
No. And like I said, I'm happy to provide in my update, because this, we're kind of off topic a little bit, but I do want to answer your question. No, and the grant only has specific amounts that we can spend towards a tree inventory. So we didn't do an RFP because it's professional services and it's not required. But I did ask for quotes and interviews with 4 different firms that do inventorying, because originally when the grant application went in, the idea was that at that time, Chair Member Shribs was going to hire 10 student interns, train them on how to do the inventory and walk them around. But unfortunately, because he's really busy, obviously he doesn't have that bandwidth, which I'm completely okay with and I understand it. So I did the reach out to see, because I knew the pricing point would be pretty high. And I'll give you guys the update, but I think we came to a happy consensus. I have a meeting tomorrow with the GIS team to see if I can make what I want to do work and be fiscally responsible. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Just a last comment on output then. So that's amazing. And of course, quickly we see how many people we could meet with. Like we could have a meeting every day and find out great information and talk about trees. But I think the big output was there's a focus on, and Brian O even said, whether that's an arborist, and we talked about whether it's an arborist or an urban forest or urban design with a focus on forestry, something like that. He does want to have that skill set present in community development, probably as some kind of contracted role, you said it's hard to find people because the private industry is so competitive that it's hard to find someone who can really do that kind of consulting. But in his vision, community development has some kind of consultation piece like that then informs building, housing, and planning. So that was with Brian O. And then with John Tribbs, one of the big outputs was this whole discussion about street trees and responsibility for public trees. Even, does our outreach committee reach out to certain corporate parks if they have trees that are neglected? What tools can we use to take care of street trees? And how can we have that bigger conversation to see the challenges Public Works faces and how we can try to shift to a place where street trees are more manageable and well taken care of. So that in a high level, we got lost. I appreciate Cindy letting us get lost in details. But at a high level, those are the conversations. They're very exciting. I think the tree committee has a lot of friends throughout the city.
That's great. Thank you guys for your work. And thank you, Cindy, for doing that. I'm going to table, I guess, the heritage tree ad hoc. Oh, do we have any public comment on that? I'm going to table the heritage tree list ad hoc since that's Roger. And then open it up to committee comment. And anybody has a comment that they would like to make? I do, but I'll let you guys go first if you want.
I said it all. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you have more than that. Okay, so for my update, I wanted to say that, hey, I saw another tree getting chopped down today in Midtown. It was a pine tree about this big at the stump, right? Whatever that is, 24 inches or something in diameter. There were power lines and telecom lines above. Just want to make a comment that a lot of arborists out there are telling owners that they can't have their tree touch the telecom lines, and I don't believe that's true. It's the energy lines. The power lines are the top ones, and those are the ones you don't want to touch and stay clear of. Also, an update on the Valero gas station on East Washington, where I saw a tree that had gotten knocked over. I made several calls, talked to the manager. Months passed, they never fixed it, and I saw the other day a groundskeeping crew out there popped out of my car, spoke Spanish with them, and they went right over to fix it. I haven't checked their work in the last couple of days, but I just want to make the point that eyes and talking and asking and appreciation in a guerrilla fashion can have an impact on some of these trees. Otherwise, that tree would have died. It'd been hit by a car. It'd been weighted down for months. The two posts that were supposed to hold it up, and it's about this tall, right? So like at least 6 feet tall. Okay. I wanted to submit that, ask if there's a place or a way that the tree committee can share all of its documents to build an archive over time so that onboarding somebody like me, who people are asking me now about trees, what trees should they plant? And I don't know. I need to build my knowledge. What has been produced in the past, whether it's final, whether it's draft, whether it's street trees, whether it's native trees, where can I go to get answers other than Google that are specific to our city for my neighbors? That would be something wonderful. Dropbox, a portal. It seems like a portal would be a perfect place. I don't know if that's Granicus or WeGov or whatever that's called now, or FedNow, whatever it's called, that we can go into, log into, and see everything. I don't know if that's possible, but in the private sector, that's the way I've experienced it. Can we, let's see, target, okay. So tonight, since Mary Kate's not here, at 6 p.m., here in the chamber only, no Zoom component. There on the agenda is a presentation about the planned install of artificial turf, forever chemical, toxic, artificial turf at Lucchese. It's the third install, and I've looked at cost-benefit analysis. When you go to the third install, you should have chosen grass. These things only last 8 to 10 years. They're not recyclable. There are mountains of landfill of rolled up forever chemical toxic turf out there in the world. There's only one place in the US that'll even take them and process them, with maybe the hope that they'll ship them over to China. So please attend tonight at 6 o'clock. Please talk. I know the soccer moms have been activated by the soccer league. We need to keep our kids safe from gopher holes when they're playing soccer. Activity is really important now with digital devices, but also safe from the health risks of forever chemicals. And then the final thing would be, I'd like to submit, if we can please talk about next time, changing the time limit for this meeting and maybe the time slot for this meeting, because we're always capped at an hour and a half and have to put things off. And that's my report.
Thank you.
Just because Roger's not here, we did see a project, Oyster Cove. We went through a process of site plan approval, basically all the entitlements, zoning changes, as well as an environmental negative declaration, which is in CEQA. Before you go to an EIR, you go through a checklist to see if there are environmental issues that warrant an EIR, or if all of those issues that might arise have already been mitigated, or the applicant, in this case Oyster Cove, has agreed to mitigate them. And one thing pertaining to trees is they were doing tree removals, and I was able to suss out, I read the arborist report, and they were going to remove, I believe, 320 inches DBH of trees. They were going to replace at approximately 290 inches and then pay a mitigation fee. And I noticed the arborist report's recommendation was, no, follow the preservation ordinance. You may not be able to do all 24-inch boxes. You may have to do some 36 interspersed to meet your DBH replacement requirements. And so it was a long discussion, but I was able to have them update that in their negative declaration. The applicant agreed, okay, we will make sure that we just replace the trees 1-to-1. We also did the same with wetland mitigation, where we said, don't pay fees, do on-site mitigation. So report on trees from planning.
Great, good work. Bill?
Let's see. A week or so ago, there was a presentation by the city to the folks that are interested in the D Street Quick Build project to calm traffic. And that was very interesting and exciting for folks in the neighborhood to kind of consider potentially calming the vehicle traffic on that street, and also allowing for more bike use and more pedestrian-friendly crosswalks and all sorts of things. I think D Street's been identified as one of the an area where there's a lot of traffic or collisions, and it's just parts of it are not very safe for pedestrians and cars. So anyway, that was interesting. There was some comments that, wait, let's get this in front of the tree committee. Like this should be like a whole street includes the trees, and I think this is a quick build. So when they go about repaving the street, which is potentially 2 years, 3 years down the road, hopefully there would be more consideration of trees and other things like that. The beautification of the street. Right now, it's about crosswalks and whether or not to take away parking for bike lanes and things like that. So that was interesting. Let's see. I've also noticed a tree in the neighborhood coming down, a large pine that the tree surgeon made clear that's private property. So it's up to it's completely up to the homeowner to decide whether that's their decision. But I think that may be coming up in the ordinance as something for the city to weigh, whether private property owners have full control to take out trees that are that important to the neighborhood. Let's see. There's some others, but why don't I just end it there? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Were you wanting to say something, Cindy? Oh, all right. Then I'll go ahead with mine. I have to say I like the direction this committee's going. It feels really good. It feels like there's some nice work getting done. And I'm going to bring up the regular meeting of the Recreation, Music, and Parks Commission at is it 6 o'clock?
6 o'clock.
For some reason I have 6:30, so I'll change that. At 6 o'clock. And I just wanted to point out on March 10th, of this year, the Guardian newspaper put out a great article on artificial turf. And I'll just quote a couple of things from the article, which is artificial turf can act as a heat island, increasing playing field temperatures to as much as 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is shocking, actually. I had to read that twice. National Football League players pressured the league in 2022 to ban artificial turf because of injuries, and the U.S. national soccer teams will only play on natural grass for the same reason. At least 9 municipalities in Connecticut, California, and Massachusetts, including the city of Boston, have begun limiting the use of synthetic fields via bans or moratoriums. Legislatures in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts also began considering prohibiting them in recent months, while a ban on non-essential uses of PFAS going into effect in Maine in 2029 could bar the use of artificial turf there. So that's just a little quoting in that article. And what my own remarks is, with the passing of a climate emergency resolution in May 2019 and subsequent legislation, Petaluma established itself as a national leader on climate action, but there's still much work to do. In partnership with Relief Petaluma, Rebuilding Petaluma, and hundreds of engaged and concerned citizens, Petaluma Parks and Recreation became a leader in this global emergency. Working together over the past year, 748 trees were successfully planted in Petaluma City Parks. It's time to build on this reputation and divest in plastic playing fields and playgrounds. I strongly urge anyone interested in this topic to attend tonight's meeting and or leave a public comment. And then also say, regarding the Federal Inflation Reduction Act grant, I got a word from Wendy from Relief as the city's agreed to pursue this grant. Loss of money for trees, including a re-oaking acorn program for open spaces. Cities working with Relief over the next several weeks to put an application together and have hired a grant writer recommended by Relief. And I also will say I'm on board with this idea that trees on private property should not be up to the owners, whether or not they take them down. I've heard arguments that you can't tell me what to do on my private property, but certainly we can tell people what to do on their private property. We already do by certain building codes and other things. So it's a topic worth discussion, and I know that many cities that I work in on a professional basis, I have to get approvals to take down anything less than a 24-inch tree. So, or anything more than a 24-inch tree. In some places, even less than a 6-inch tree. So, and that's it. And then for that, I will turn it. Or, do we ask for public comment on this? No. Then I'll turn it over to staff for comment.
Thank you. Couple quick things, and then I'll get into my updates on the CAL FIRE grant. Number one, I got notice that we did get our Arbor Day application was approved for last year, so it takes them a while once we put the application in December. So we are Tree City again this year. And second, just to thank all the committee members that came out to Arbor Day. It was really lovely. It's really lovely to be together again and be able to plant those trees. So really thank you out at McNair, and we got those 3 trees in the ground. They were beautiful. Jeff did a really nice job of picking the trees this year, so they were just really lovely. Outside of that, on the CAL FIRE grant, so lots of movement, lots of things happening. Like I said, I gave a brief overview, but I've been interviewing people to get the tree inventory in place because that's step 1, so I can move on to getting an urban forestry person on board to do the UFM, to actually do it. So we've went through the process, and it did range. I think, community member Obey, like you said, like it ranges from like 200 and something thousand to maybe less than that. So where I'm sitting at this point and hopefully getting a contract in place, it all hinges on my meeting tomorrow with the GIS team to see if what we want to do is possible. Because one of the things that I would prefer to steer away from is a company that does inventory that ties me to a software program that I have to subscribe from them and it's proprietary to them, which is kind of what I found is what most of these companies do. iTree is one of the softwares that's out there that a lot of people use and we know about. And Davy Group is the one who helped create that software, so they know a lot about that. But Davy Group is also expensive, right, for what they provide. So, like I said, we've interviewed quite a few, and we're hoping that we'll be able to tie up and we'll get the inventory process started soon. So hopefully next month I will have some bigger news to update you on. And if if it does work out the way we'd like it to, we're going to do a test run to make sure that it works out. But Urban Forestry Associates, who is Ben Anderson and the company that he works for. So I've been talking to Ben, and he was willing to take this on. He didn't have bandwidth before, but he has some bandwidth because he's finishing up a project. So we're hoping to bring him on board. And also, I believe, and I haven't had a chance to connect with Heather again, but I did connect Heather and Ben did say that he spoke with Heather to help inform their updating process of the historical preservation ordinance. So I think, some of the questions that kind of stem around, like, are we just getting an arborist, or are we getting somebody who has, some urban forestry experience? And I will tell you, the intent was always to find somebody who had urban forestry experience, because I think that's important. And luckily enough, Ben lives here in Petaluma, really cares about Petaluma, and it sounds like he is willing to take on this work for us, so we'll get him under contract. Hope I'm saying this in a public meeting, Ben, if you're watching or you hear about this. But no, I'm really, really grateful for that, because he's been really busy, so it's nice that he has that availability. He's done some good work, some really good work, some of the other stuff that he's done, and he's consulted on smaller things for me in the parks. So I find Ben really, really intelligent, knowledgeable, and just empathetic to what Petaluma's needs are. And so I think it'll be really positive moving forward. Now, within the grant, so there's a few components, just so that everybody, I'll give a brief overview. And at some point I will bring a presentation once I have something to present, kind of like our steps, what we're doing, and I will present out to you, I promise. But there's a component that there's the inventory and the UFM, and then there's the ordinance process. And this is a requirement of the grant. So that update is required of the grant. So that will happen, even though it's slower than we wanted it to maybe happen. And then there's a component that's community-based. We're going to plant in a few of our parks. So we'll be planting trees in Miwok, Kenilworth, if the time frame allows. If it doesn't allow, then we'll probably shift it to another park, Fox Hollow. And we're hoping, I was working with Relief to see if we can get some contacts at Adobe School where Miwok is, so that we can do a planning both across the school and at the park, and not just at the park. Because if you've been over to Miwok School, you'll know that it is a heat island. There's very few trees across there. So if we can make that joint partnership and plant trees from the grant, then we'll be happy to do it. But yeah, so a lot of positive progress. Sometimes it's slower than we want it to be, even for me. But I'm making steps, so I'm happy to give you that update. Chair Formby kind of touched on this a little bit, the USDA grant. I'll give you a little bit more information on that. Patrick Carter out of the city manager's office is heading it for the city team, and of course I'm playing supporting role just because I'm trying to get CAL FIRE grant up and running. But yeah, we've had really great talks. We are going to get a package together. It's just kind of getting all the specifics out. For that grant, it does require a 1-to-1 match at the federal level from us, because we don't have DACs. So that's okay. We're getting all our ducks in a row, and we're going to get a package together, and we're going to shoot our shot. We think it's worth it. We think there's a lot of good work to do there. And if that comes through, just know that there'll be a lot more things happening. It's a 5-year grant period. So that's exciting news. Keep your fingers crossed and advocate for us out there if you hear of anything. And there's going to be a lot of joint partnerships on that one too. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed. I went to the California Relief Network conference last week. It was really great. We got to hear what some foundations are doing. CAL FIRE was there. Walter, who's the head of CAL FIRE, reported out that California did receive, I think it's either 42.3 or 43.2 million as part of that Inflation Act. But when they get their program up and running, they're only going to give grants to DACs, so we won't qualify for that. So that's why it's doubly important that we're going to go for the federal grant and not go through CAL FIRE. But California was awarded more than double the next state, and far and above and beyond more than any other state. So there's a lot of, I think, positivity and momentum, and I think the federal level even sees what California is trying to do. So just a lot of stuff. It was really inspiring, and next year I'll make sure that you have the information, and if you can attend, I would highly recommend it. Sacramento, their tree foundation and what they do and how established they are is just really inspiring to me. And I go, when we grow up, I'd love for Petaluma to have a tree foundation. I met with my county counterparts today. We have a roundtable quarterly, and I had a conversation of like, hey, how do we do trees regionally, like for Sonoma County? Petaluma's doing our thing, but Petaluma's one piece of the pie. Is there something we can do jointly? If there's these bigger grants, maybe we go for it as a county. So I'm starting these discussions. I just got to be able to keep like all my lines and kind of, keep up on everything. But if you have a chance, and if you haven't, go to the California Relief webpage and kind of see what they're doing. Chico's got this cool program. They're doing an education program. This woman has created this activity book that's just beautiful, and it has activities that has a checklist for kids on what you need to plant a tree, and it's just, and the native trees in their area. There's just really, really inspiring things that they're doing. The city of Watsonville, they have friends of the Watsonville wetlands, and they will joke with you because they started off by suing the city. But now, they're really established and they've done well. But they recently, in this past year, took on trees. They didn't have trees before. And they have a program where they give out free trees. They come to your home, they evaluate kind of your space and what type of tree would be best to plant. They gift you the tree, and they help you the first 3 years to teach you how to establish that tree, which I thought was really cool. And at some point, I'd love if Petaluma could do something like that. So I got a lot of inspiration from what other groups are doing. I just wanted to say, if you can go next year, please go. A couple members from Relief went with me, so it was really nice for the three of us to hear what other groups are doing and be inspired by them. But outside of that, we are busy, lots of stuff going on, and there will be a lot of change. And I just want to say thank you to the committee. I mean, just a lot of work coming out of here, and just grateful for you guys all the time. So, and to put kind of in your brain, because it was brought forth by committee member Recusant, Treestival. Am I saying that right? Treestival?
Tree Fest.
Tree Fest. I love the idea of it, but it takes a lot of planning. And since Arbor Day just passed, I get this, but it takes about a year to plan a festival and do it really well. So if you want to start thinking about that, if maybe we want to create an ad hoc for Arbor Day 2024, that may be something to put on the agenda soon, okay? And I will be presenting on the natural turf portion at Rec Commission tonight and kind of what that maintenance is. So if you want to come and support me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. If it's very quick, because we're over time.
It's very quick, but I think you overlooked one of your recent successes. And that is Cindy got out, her Parks Department got out, after listening and hearing the community, an RFP for a natural play structure for one of the parks, I forget which one, instead of plastic, something to be made by an artist. And I thought that was really cool. Thank you. Congratulations.
Oh, it was a joint thing, and I didn't know the RFP had went out, if I'm being honest, so thank you. We had been, because the request has been there, and we love the natural play structures. It's just, they don't last as long, and that's our major problem. We just got to find the funding. That's it. We just got to find the funding. Yeah.
Thank you. And that is it. I'll move to close the meeting. Meeting